Hello and welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a real pleasure to be joined by a digital futurist, Dr. Mark van Rijmenam. Mark, you're very welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be here with us on the Global Discussion. Let's get into it. Maybe introduce yourself to our worldwide audience. Tell us a little bit about your career and this wonderful world of predicting the future that you're in.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for having me, Simon. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your show. So I am a futurist, a strategic futurist, a digital futurist, which means that I help organizations around the world, Fortune 500 companies and governments, to understand where we're heading and to help them understand how emerging technologies are going to change society and their organization. I live and breathe cutting edge technologies in order to help them understand what's happening. Literally, because I have recently cloned myself. So I'm available as a digital twin, hence the name, the world's only digital futurist, because you can actually talk to me via text, audio, and video on demand in 29 different languages. I consider myself an optimistic dystopian, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but it helps me to understand where we're heading in terms of technology. And I believe that in order to end up in a thriving digital future, we need to be able to understand also the bad and the ugly of these technologies. I also run a media platform called Dataflock, and I'm building a new media company called FutureWise, where we turn the best non-AI content into hyper-personalized daily insights in many formats and many languages. So all very, very exciting things happening here.
Well, listen, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. There's so much to unpack there and so much to talk about, but let's get into cloning ourselves first, okay? So you have a digital twin. How do you go about doing that? How is the digital twin keeping? Are they well? Are they performing good? Are they giving good answers? How is the digital twin working out in reality, Mark?
Well, my digital twin is doing really well. It or he is having a great time. But it's sort of, I guess, a bit of a history of how it started. So I'm a keynote speaker, among others. And when the pandemic hit, obviously, my business was hit quite hard, just like all other speakers. So I decided to change the game, and I created my brand, The Digital Speaker. And from that moment, it's always been my idea to digitally clone myself, because I think it's one, I like to practice what I preach, as I mentioned. And two, I think it's just really cool to do that. And there's a lot of ethical considerations that come with it as well that I'd like to explore. So it took me a lot longer than I anticipated, but earlier this year, with the rise of large language models, it had become a lot easier to do so. Now, I'm not necessarily the first one who has a digital twin that can, that you can talk to via text and audio. But as far as I know, I'm the first one who has a digital twin that also does video, where you can have an on-demand conversation, which basically looks like what you have right now, and then you can talk to me. I think my digital twin looks a little bit younger, but other than that, my digital twin has the same knowledge as I do. So it's trained roughly around 5 million words, which is sort of where it becomes interesting and relevant to actually have a digital twin. And anything less is a bit, you don't really get the good answers. And it's everything I've done in the past 12 years. So it's all my 5 books are in there. My 3 academic papers, my dissertations are in there. I've got about 1,000 articles which are in there. My 4 podcasts are in there. Everything that I do online is in there. And you can actually ask the questions to me, and then have the same conversation with my digital twin, and you will see that the answers are pretty much similar. Because we've tested this, which is really interesting to see, and the fact that I now speak 29 different languages is pretty cool as well.
Well, people watching or listening to this episode will have to wait till the end to find out for real whether we're talking to Mark or the digital twin. So we'll hold that till the end. Let me go back to something else that you said, because you mentioned FutureWise, and I really want to get into that a little bit, because when it comes to democratizing knowledge, and also maybe getting, you were talking about sort of creating that high quality content, but that it's also hyper personalized. And I know some people are struggling with that, particularly in the world of AI at the moment, because it doesn't necessarily behave in the way that they want it to. But could you tell us about what you're doing with FutureWise and why this sort of democratization of knowledge is important to you, and how are you going about that from that hyper personalized perspective?
Sure. Let me first share a little bit about why we're building this. The reason why we're building this is, to be quite frankly, I struggle as a futurist to stay up to date. And it's my job to stay up to date. That's one end. There's so much information overload. I think it's actually literally $1 trillion problem they have estimated that information overload costs the global economy. But at the same time, there's so much noise going on social media. There's so much low quality content and misinformation. And finding the right content is really, really difficult, and it took me quite a long time to figure out where I can find my content and how to process that content. And if you don't have the time for that, which, let's be honest, if you're not a futurist whose job it is to do this for work, for a living, you don't have the time to do that. And that's why we're building FutureWise to help people be in the know without being out of time. So we go about the personalization from one end that I don't care if you're a man or a woman, or if you're your age, or where you live. I really don't care about that. What I think is much more interesting is how you engage with content. What's your persona? What's your preferred tone of voice? What's your preferred writing style? What's your expertise? What's your language? And we can tailor content to that. So we want to scale thought leadership. We want to scale high quality content, but at the same time, we want to achieve a paradigm shift in the global media industry, because I believe that the global media industry has their drivers incorrectly. We're all driven by advertising, by clickbait, by low quality content, and I think that is really problematic. Especially if you value democracy, which I still do. I think journalism is really, really important, high quality journalism, and so we completely changed the game by rewarding the content creators, but taking into consideration the quality of that content. So only the best content will be going into our engine, and if you're in our engine, you are getting a rev share based on how we use your content. And that completely changes the game. And as a user, it means that you can actually trust FutureWise, that the content that you receive through FutureWise is trustworthy content, because that is one of the big problems today: is how do you find relevant and trustworthy content?
I think it's an excellent point that you make, and I love the line that you use where you talk about moving the publishing industry from clicks to quality. And I think that's ultimately, away from the vanity metrics, maybe, if I could use that sort of terminology, and getting into what's true, what's a fact, what's actually, whether it's good journalism, good publishing, useful information that's been checked to some degree. And we are seeing, aren't we, a number of major news outlets that maybe, depending on your viewpoint, would be maybe more credible than others, doing very large licensing deals at the moment with some of these AI companies, because they have this wealth of, to some degree, curated, well thought through, knowledgeable content. So what's the aim of FutureWise? Where do you see it in sort of 3 years, 5 years time? Like, what's the plan for it?
Well, to your point about these large publishers licensing, that's very nice if you're a large publisher. But if you are a small thought leader, you're not going to license your content to OpenAI. OpenAI is just going to take it, whether you like it or not. OpenAI has taken my content, whether I like it or not, and that is problematic. So I think there we need to change. And moreover, the moment, so we focus on fast changing topics. The moment a fast changing topic ends up in the Financial Times or the New York Times, it's already in the mainstream, and you're already too late as an organization. You want to be in the know the moment it happens. That's where we focus on. So if you ask where do we see ourselves 2 or 3 years from now, we want to scale thought leadership, as I mentioned. We want to equalize access to knowledge, so that regardless of your expertise, regardless of your language, you can understand what's going on in the world. Because let's not forget, most of the high quality content, we focus initially on technology concepts, is in English. But only 1.5 billion people speak English, meaning 6.5 billion people don't. So we want to equalize access to knowledge from that perspective.
I think that's such an important point, because the more people I talk to, the more you realize that most of the data training is done in English. Most of it is quite biased. It isn't a level.
You can leave away the quite.
Yeah, exactly. It isn't this level playing field that we think it is. And, the fact that there are a lot of people on the planet that still don't have access to these type of tools. But when it comes to the data itself, you've mentioned a few times, Mark, about, we train the model. Well, the model has my data in it. But it's not just as simple as loading it up, is it? I mean, you have to have the data in some sort of format or some sort of order in order for your large language model or your sort of data lake, if you want, to actually be useful. Am I right in saying that?
Well, yes, of course. You wanna have the right metadata on the data that you put into this, because the more metadata we have, the better we're able to synthesize it and to create what we call a daily digest. That we create this personalized daily digest that keeps you up to date by just simply consuming that daily digest. So yes, you obviously want that, but in the end, if there's one thing that large language models are very, very good at, it's summarizing and it's synthesizing. And if you use large language models for that objective, you notice that hallucinations are also a much smaller problem, because you make it smaller instead of making it bigger. And if you make it bigger, you start to get into the prediction engine that these large language models are. But if you make it smaller, that problem is less harmful. So that makes it easier to use, and we see obviously that the developments in these large language models are going insanely fast. Llama 3 was just released. ChatGPT 5 is coming later this year. Mistral, a French open source platform, is launching almost on a monthly basis. So you see there's a lot of developments happening in here, which is exciting. But also, to my earlier point, this topic side, there's a lot of warning signals here as well, because it can also be misused quite badly.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Mark. And I've had the pleasure of working with a number of futurists over the years in very large technology organizations. And one of the things that always struck me about futurists is that they're busy thinking about the stuff that nobody's thought of yet, right? They're ahead of everybody. They're thinking about the future. I know it sounds obvious, but they're 10 years, 20 years down the road in terms of the experiences I've had of working with a futurist in business. And having a futurist in a business is more and more popular, particularly for companies that are looking to grow, predict the future, drive future revenue growth. And my question around that is, because you're known as the world's only sort of digital futurist, and you're also a keynote speaker, you talk to some of the world's biggest brands, you're on some of the biggest stages. Is there any sort of common questions or common themes, or is there anything that you're sort of talking about at the moment that is particularly resonating with that sort of corporate body?
Well, I think on everyone's lips is, of course, AI. But before I go that, I want to just go back to that earlier point that you mentioned, where you said that futurists, more and more organizations should actually have a futurist on the board, which I think is really, really important. And to such an extent that I've just started a new podcast called Synthetic Minds, where I actually interview science fiction writers in order to help organizations become better at future thinking. Because I think science fiction writers are really, really good at envisioning the future, in the far-flung future, the impossible, the implausible, which is very useful to think about that as an organization, because especially if you're a very large organization, you're a big tanker. It takes a while to change direction, and having a science fiction writer or a futurist for that matter as part of your organization, I think is very, very useful. Now, to come back to your other question, everyone is of course thinking about AI. What do we do with this? To what extent is this useful within our organization? And there's quite a few research surveys being done which show that a lot of CEOs are actually really scared and but also skeptical. How can we use this? What are the consequences? What are the security implications? What are the privacy implications? How do I ensure that my proprietary data doesn't end up in the training data of OpenAI? All very, very valid points. But what I always tell organizations when I talk to them is that you have to start using AI, because the AI train has left. And if you are not on board, you have a very, very big problem. And I foresee that by 2030, and mind you, that's only 6 years away, and there are only two types of organizations left: those that use AI and those that don't exist. So you will have to start experimenting with AI, whether it's even if it's only using Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude or Llama, whatever large language model. You have to start exploring how this technology and how you can benefit from it, because if you don't, you will be left behind. You snooze, you lose, is, I think, quite applicable here.
I couldn't agree more. And look, one thing I have to ask you, because anybody that is in the sort of space and thinking that you're in, I love to bring up the two questions of AGI and quantum computing, because that is true futuristic stuff. There are some experiments going on at the moment. There are some small scale quantum realities that are sort of happening with some companies funding them. But I want to get it from you as a futurist looking at it. What's your views on true AGI, and what's your views on quantum computing? Where are we at now? Is it a reality in our lifetime, and everything in between? What do you think, Mark?
Well, it's funny that you ask, because I literally about an hour ago published an article on superintelligence on my website, of why I think this is a reality and is probably going to happen in the next decade or so. So it's, obviously at the moment we are far from AGI, and there are different statements about artificial general intelligence, or AI that is as intelligent as a human being, so it can reason, it can perceive the world, it can think about its answers, it can contemplate, it can work across domains, it can learn across domains. So we're still quite far away from that. But I do believe that development are moving so fast at the moment that it will happen a lot faster than originally anticipated. Now, you have the Elon Musk of this world who say that that AGI will happen next year, but I think every prediction of Elon Musk we should take with a large grain of salt. But it will happen, simply because of the convergence of technologies, because we can now use also the AI to help us solve some of the problems that we need to solve in order to get to AGI. Now, in terms of your question for quantum computing, I think that's sort of the same thing, where we see there's a lot of developments happening. And in fact, I think today, because I'm based in Australia, today the Australian government announced $1 billion funding to build the first commercial quantum computer here in Australia, which is quite exciting. And as long as it doesn't interfere with the laws of physics, it's going to happen. And it's just our lack of understanding of how the quantum world works that we haven't build a full-fledged commercial quantum computing. But there's nothing in the laws of physics that would prevent us from building it. So it will happen. And I think where it becomes really, really interesting, where we have the convergence of quantum computing and artificial intelligence, because then they can benefit each other to propel us even further. So that combination, I think, is really, really interesting. Also very scary, because it comes with a lot of downsides. Once we have a full-fledged commercial quantum computer, such as that all encryption globally is going to be useless. Minor point. But it's so there are some serious issues here to think about. But in general, I think because of the convergence of these technologies, we will reach AGI, we will reach artificial superintelligence, definitely within our lifetime.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Definitely within our lifetime. He also mentioned within the next sort of 10 years type time frame for AGI, maybe. And how AI, I think you make a great point, how the current AI, whether we wait at this time of recording, we're waiting on GPT-5 or whatever, OpenAI and Sam and the team come out with next. But it is getting better and better and faster and faster. And it reminds me of something you said earlier, that as a futurist, you're almost dealing with a fire hose of changes on a daily basis, never mind thinking about the next 5, 10, 50 years down the road. And I think if we get to the point where we can sort of herd these and corral these qubits into some kind of order and figure out what's going on there, quantum computing to some degree changes the complete world. I mean, what we have today will be almost irrelevant in lots of areas if we get there. And I think the combination of AGI and quantum computing is huge. It is potentially
absolutely
world changing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so if we look at sort of the longer term, and I always try to have a long term perspective, I do believe that if we achieve AGI and ASI, artificial superintelligence, with or without a combination of quantum computing, we will end up in a world of abundance. But to arrive there, we have to go through a very, very rocky period, and I'm not confident we'll succeed there. So that's my optimistic dystopian side here, because yes, once we get there, fantastic. But to get there, there's some really big hurdles that we have to cross. One of them is the massive job killer that AI is going to be, which will completely disrupt society, and where no society around the world is really thinking about it at the moment. We have this big elephant in the room, and everyone's just ignoring the elephant, hoping that the elephant will just walk away, which obviously is not going to happen. So we have this enormous technology with enormous potential to completely change society. We just have to make sure that it doesn't kill us before we reach the end, before we reach the level of abundance.
I think it, again, another excellent point. It's a bit, people often talk about the tractor changing farming and agriculture and the jobs moving to the cities and away from the land. Whether that's a good or a bad thing in hindsight, we will find out. But you mentioned Elon Musk as well, and there are some views that robots could outnumber humans just in terms of the type of labor and the type of work that the future of robotics combined with artificial intelligence or AGI potentially, what that means for the future of work. And it is fundamentally different. And I hear what you're saying. I think the way the world is set up today, there are fundamental structural changes that are going to be quite painful, and take quite a while to get through if we get through them.
Yeah, well, I think that's quite problematic and challenging. And the way I see it, AI will at least kill 1 billion jobs, at least, and that's 20% roughly of the global workforce. Now, imagine at the moment we're living through a period with record low unemployment levels around the world, but we've also seen what happened in the Arab Spring, where there was a very high youth unemployment. Now, imagine 5-10 years from now, global unemployment at 20%. What's that going to do to society? And people think, that's not going to happen because, as you said, we had the printing press and we found new jobs, and we had the agriculture and we found new jobs, etc. Yes, it might very well be true, but one thing people forget, that AI is an autonomous technology. It can make decisions autonomously without the need of a human. Moreover, we live in a capitalist society. So if we have a technology that can help us reduce cost, improve efficiency, improve output, and most importantly, improve the profit for the shareholder, you will always implement that technology. And if you don't do it, your competitor will do it, and then will buy you, and it will happen after all. So hence my point I made earlier, by 2030, there's two types of company, those that use AI and those that don't exist. And that is, I think that people don't see happening. Because people say, well, it's not happening, but we are not very good at exponential thinking. And we overestimate the short term, we underestimate the long term, is the famous saying. And the challenge here is, what I foresee is in the next 2 to 3 years, not much will happen. But then towards the end of this decade, we'll reach a tipping point where all of a sudden organizations around the world will start firing people. And before we know it, we have 20% unemployment. And societies are not preparing for this. The only society that is somehow preparing for this is Singapore, where they have said recently that everyone 40 years and older will get a grant from the government to re-educate whatever they want to do, which is a very good step in the right direction, but not sufficient. But all the other countries are doing nothing. And that's very scary, if you can see what it will do to society.
Yeah, I think the clock is ticking between the technology and, as you say, autonomous decision making, and where the human race moves to from that, and how we help the human race move to that. Because in one sense, it's utopia. It's, you don't need to work. There's a standard level of income. There's enough food for everybody. We fix a lot of the world's problems. On the other hand, it's quite a dark scenario. So I think we've got a lot of choices to make.
Well, and let's not forget that work gives meaning. No matter how shitty job you have, work still gives you meaning and gives you a reason to get up out of bed in the morning. And we should not forget that. What are we going to do if those jobs disappear? One thing that I foresee is that entertainment is going to explode and become much bigger in gaming than it already is. But is it a fulfilling life if all you do is gaming and live in the metaverse? I'm not sure. So these are really big questions that we need to ask ourselves, and we're not asking them. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're at the time of recording again, we're seeing Apple come out with maybe not getting as many demos or shipping as many headsets as they thought maybe they were going to. We have the future of work, and what does that mean? Are we actually ever going to leave our homes again because we can just literally look through something and we're almost there? It's as close as being there in sort of real time. But it's going to be interesting, and it kind of brings me on to something that I have to ask you, which is what's on your roadmap? What are you thinking about personally over the next 6 months, 18 months, 36 months? So not necessarily from a futuristic perspective, but just on your own roadmap. What are you looking to achieve? What are some of the goals that you have? And what does that look like for you? How does that work in your sort of planning world?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So my focus is all on FutureWise, because I foresee the societal need to build this and to build it fast. So that's my main focus point at the moment, as well as, of course, still doing keynotes around the world to help organizations drive change and prepare for this future that is coming quite rapidly. But so my on my roadmap is staying up to date, understanding what's happening, and giving that information to organizations either through keynotes or talks or workshops whatsoever, or through the platform that I'm building, which has all my attention at the moment.
That's lovely, Mark. And if people want to connect with you, find out more about what's going on, maybe download the Digital Speaker app, get you to speak at one of their conferences, or to find out more about FutureWise, where's the best place to point people to?
So the best place to go is my website, thedigitalspeaker.com. If you want to speak to my digital twin, it's you have to go use your mobile because it's a progressive web app. So we're not in the app stores, but it's app.thedigitalspeaker.com on your mobile, and then you can subscribe to my insights that you'll get on a daily basis, as well as talk to my digital twin. And otherwise, if you want to learn more about FutureWise, you can go to futurewise.com. And you find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm quite visible. Drop me a note. Always happy to chat about anything future.
100%. Well, look, Mark, that brings us nicely to the end of our time together today here on the Global Discussion. I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to our discussion today. We certainly do appreciate it. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out everything that Mark is involved in. It's fascinating, and there's an awful lot of great value there. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more conversations with creatives and leaders and thinkers and futurists, just like Mark. So thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me, Simon.